12 essential insights for emotional sobriety. I believe that this is going to be a definitive work in terms of defining emotional sobriety and laying out a path to achieve it. If you're stuck in recovery, or if you want to take the next step in your recovery, please read my book. It's been quite an evening tonight. 2 hours before this, I had the book release party for 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. And God, it was quite moving. Thom, Roger, Ryan, Herb is here, and anybody else is here that was there. It was really filled me with a lot of love. So thank you guys. I'm very grateful right now. We've been talking about how the 12 steps help us achieve emotional sobriety. As Bill Wilson stated in the 12 and 12, that if we practice these principles in our daily affairs, that we and those about us begin to achieve emotional sobriety. And this meeting has been focusing on, for several months now, how that actually happens. What are the effects, the therapeutic effects that help us achieve emotional sobriety? And one way that we've talked about it is that the steps really create this incredible energy, right? It's so powerful that there's this charge that happens, and then there's this discharge that takes place. And what one step is dependent on what happens in the step before it, and then it creates a certain charge that leads us to the next step. And this process, this momentum, is carrying us in a very, very important direction. As you know, I've talked a lot about the biological imperative that if we are normal neurologically, then we move towards what we can be. It's also true even if we're not. If we're impaired neurologically, we still move us towards what we can possibly be given our limitations. That biological force to actualize our potential is unbelievable. It's incredible. And it happens automatically in terms of the biological, or in terms of our biological or physical development. As I've said before, you don't have to tell a child it's time to start walking. The child just wants to start walking because it can. And a child will not be, discouraged by making mistakes in learning how to walk. They will get up and they will fall, they will fail as many times as the child needs to fail until the child can master the ability to walk. Now, the steps are doing for us what we weren't able to do for ourselves, in terms of that the psychological imperative to move us towards what we can be easily hijacked. And as soon as we make a veer to the right or to the left, that force will now actualize whatever direction we're heading in. I've met no alcoholics or addicts that weren't the best alcoholics and addicts that they could possibly be. They went to any lengths to drink, to use, to get drugs, and compromise integrity, whatever it is, because it was the same force that's at work that can turn us into what we can be in terms of our recovery and help us grow our true self. I often talk about that force. It's like Miracle Grow. Whatever you put it on, it's just going to grow the shit out of it. And if we put it on our false self, or our alcoholic self, or addict self, or, whatever, sex addict self, it will make us the best addict that we can possibly be. Now, it's not until later on in our life and we develop a certain kind of consciousness that we can start making choices to make sure that we're putting this miracle grow in the right spots so that we're not growing weeds, we're growing a whole garden of vegetables that can nourish us and others, right? That's what this whole thing is about. But this psychological imperative that moves us, as you can tell from what I'm saying, is much more fragile than that physical or biological imperative that moves us. It can be easily interfered with and interrupted. You know, we can get all kinds of messages, injunctions, introjections. You know, Thom shared in the last 2 hours the bully stuff. You know, we can introject a bully inside of us that is now is a perfectionist and demanding that we be this way or that way. And we can follow the wrong line home, and we get lost when we do that. Well, many people, when they come to the program, they finally say, this is home. And what makes it home? It's because all of you is welcome here. That's the bottom line. All of you is welcome here. That we can show up and learn from our mistakes, that we can share our shame and be in fellowship with others that are struggling with that as well. That we can all share our suffering and grow from it and learn from these things and start to grow ourselves into what we can be. Recovery is a people growing process. And now we're thinking about it as growing us in this direction of emotional sobriety, is helping us find emotional freedom, emotional autonomy. True independence of spirit is what Bill Wilson called it. That's the direction that we're heading. And the steps are, I believe, helping us recover our lost true self. We are made to be emotionally autonomous. That is our potential to stand on our own 2 feet, to be what we can be. And that's what's happening. And that's what I love when we talked about step 6, and we talked about is the pivot step. We're now pivoting towards developing the best possible attitude towards ourselves, towards life, towards our relationships with other people, the best possible attitude towards our relationship with our higher power that we can possibly have. That the best relationship is going to be one that is nourishing, one that's going to nurture us, one that's going to enhance our experience, not diminish it, not subtract from our experience, but add to it. It's an attitude that welcomes all of our experience, and that we know we can grow from anything, that the only limitations are the ones that we impose on our experiences. It helps us transform an attitude of emotional dependency into a life force where we become the determining force in our life. So we really recover our lost true self. And now we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And one of the things I wanted to talk about that I spoke a lot about last time is making available that which was unavailable. And I talked about the holes, right? The holes that our development creates. And especially when we get messages from our family that we then internalize that I've got to be this way, and I've got to do this to survive this, and then I've got to be like this to be okay. I mean, those things turn some of our behavior into fixed behavior, stereotyped behavior. The more fixed my behavior is, the less flexible I am. You know, there's a great thing, and Thom says it a lot from neurolinguistic programming. The brain doesn't understand don't. If you say, don't think of a pink elephant, of course you're going to think of a pink elephant. So it's not about don't have your shortcomings. When we're humbly asking to have them removed, we don't focus on our shortcomings. We focus on the other side. We own what we need to own, but we own it to now focus on the other piece. We don't focus on our dishonesty. We focus on finding the courage to be honest. I love one of the things that Abraham Maslow said, which was the opposite of my philosophy. He says, when in doubt, be honest. For me, when in doubt, lie. I mean, don't tell the truth. lie about it. My God, it's going to, that's the way to deal with things. But we start shifting our attitude towards those things, and we focus on who we can be, what we can be, instead of what we're not. That becomes such an important part. Now we start striving for these things. And this step, when we're humbly asking to have our shortcomings removed, we're going to get a big answer in step 8. It's going to tell us some of the things that we need to do to start to now create the way, pave the path for us to develop this best possible attitude. And what it's going to say is clean up some of your unfinished business. And that's what I wanted to mention today. Step 7 is setting us up to clean up unfinished business. We are asking to have our shortcomings removed, and the way they're going to get removed is go back and deal with all of the things you've been avoiding. Own who you're not. Own the parts of you that you're ashamed of. Face who you're not so that you can become what you can be. That's what this step is charging us for. We are going to be told to be incredibly specific in step 8 and 9. We're going to be asked and tasked to do things that most people would avoid their whole life. And we're doing it to be what we can be. We're doing it because we know the taste of freedom. We know where this is going to take us. We are motivated by this possibility of growth. And when that becomes your motivation, nothing can stand in your way. If we're just motivated because of pain, it's hard to sustain things when you're no longer in pain. But when you're motivated by growth, now life is at your fingertips. And that's the shift that's taking place here in step 7, as we now, 2 weeks from tonight, will be turning to step 8. So now I will turn this over to my dear friends and colleagues, Roger and Thom, and ask them to comment on what I've said tonight or anything they want to say about step 7 before we move forward.
Okay. Roger, if you want to go first, you can. He remains muted. It's Alan bought me this shirt. Interestingly, timing just before we did his book thing tonight. I'm assuming he was just wanting me to say some nice things about him. So, and I did.
The shirt worked. The shirt.
So there
worked.
you go. There you go.
Worked.
Now, the reason I like this shirt is the association, because we went to kind of discovered them together a little bit. But when I put Imagine together with you, Alan, it takes me to that thing that I one of my favorite things that you talk about in emotional sobriety, and that is new possibilities. Always about new possibilities, and so that's I like the Imagine part of that. Here's something I hadn't thought about until you just said that. So I'm just going to mention what I'm just putting together, and then I'll turn it over to Roger. It's Alan, in that little workbook thing I did a long time ago called Recovery Decision. It's like where it was about taking responsibility for your own recovery. One of the things I talk about in there is motivation. I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but the idea, something I've said to people on the front end of addiction treatment for a long time, is I don't give a crap what motivates you to get started. It doesn't matter. I mean, none of, very few of us went into AA or went into treatment or because we thought it was a great idea. It's like, we did it because we felt pressure, and we felt the original motivation is to avoid the shit that's happening. To avoid something. It's negative motivation. It's moving away. I wasn't going to lose my marriage. I wasn't going to lose my career. I wasn't going to be pulled over by the cops anymore. All of those things. But one of the things that I talk about in that is that there is a motivation shift that happens when you actually take responsibility for not for just your recovery, but just for learning more about it. And the shift is from a running away from the negative to going toward the positive. And I'd never thought about that in terms of step 7. And you're right. It fits in here. It's like there is this motivation shift, because to me, step 7, as we've gone through it, I love how we're doing it, where we go and spend some time, we go into each step and just sort of sit down in it, is what it has felt like to me. And we just sit and look around and talk about it. And it's like, it just, it helps during the Thursday night thing. And then it gets me thinking about it all through the week. And so what I jotted down when you were talking just then was step 7. We become comfortable in our humility, or because we're going to need it, because the rest of this is the rest of our lives, and it's time to get busy. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Roger.
Okay. What comes to my mind, Alan, when you're speaking about beginning to focus on what's missing, right? And we just talked a lot about going back and cleaning up our, past wrongs, our past transgressions in life. And I think the way I think of it is, at an emotional level, it's going back and starting to face some of the feelings. Like you mentioned, shame is a huge one. I talk a lot about self-acceptance, and one of the largest barriers to self-acceptance is, of course, shame, right? And guilt. I preach that we need to begin with where we're at. So if I'm feeling ashamed and I can't handle my shame, that's what I start to talk about, right? If I'm willing to be open enough to. But to me, by going back and addressing the shame that I've experienced, the guilt, remorse, embarrassment, even humiliation, it's like, I think of it as like I'm excavating, I'm clearing space within myself, right? That is now tied up with all kinds of tension and bound up energy, because I'm working hard to keep that shame at bay, or I'm working hard to keep that guilt and remorse at bay. And one of the things, if I check myself and ask myself how much my ego with a capital E is dictating my choices, or my concern with what other people think of me, or all of that stuff, if I can check myself and try to come back into my body and my breathing and back down to earth, right, then I feel more able to do the work of facing my shame and facing my guilt and facing regret that I live with. But one of the things, and that to me opens space within myself where I can then begin to make some new connections, right? And it's great if I have some new information, like your book is filled with, Alan. But a lot of times what I find for myself or my clients is they don't necessarily need new information. Just getting some kind of closure or completion with the unfinished business from their past opens pathways for it's almost like for part of their brain, their forebrain or their cerebral cortex, the more language-oriented, problem-solving, future planning-oriented areas of our brain become more available to us. I often say for myself and for people I work with, there are huge parts of us that don't realize we've grown up. There are huge parts of us at an emotional level that still totally feel like we did as a kid. In fact, my perspective is that a lot of the feelings we feel as adults are actually memories. They're not pictures in our heads, so we don't think of them as, what I did as a kid. And they're not even thoughts about what I did in the past. But I think a lot of memories are actually repetitions. And working through, which is not easy. Alan, you give some examples in your book of just horrendously painful, horrendously difficult situations, like the one woman you mentioned. I think you called her Charlene in the book, who was losing her daughter to cancer. And she didn't, the platitudes that she was given by friends or even by people in program and AA weren't helpful to her about acceptance and God's will. And she needed to face the pain that she was in. And I appreciated your description of your work with her so much, Alan, because she spent a lot of time grieving and raging and being mad at God and being mad at the cancer. And to me, that's what coming to more of a place of self-acceptance is. It's not that spiritual bypass that you also write about in the book. It's digging in more deeply. And that's what, to me, opens new possibilities for connections, for us to be able to solve some of our own problems that we just hadn't thought about solutions before. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I got. So.
Very helpful. Great comments from both of you.
One of the things that it's important for us to think about in our recovery is our relationship to our emotions. I know that depending on the way we're raised, certain feelings and certain emotions are going to be okay. They're going to be acceptable. And those that aren't are going to be pushed aside and disowned. Well, recovery is about recovering your lost true self. See, it's about achieving wholeness again. Because when I fragment myself, and when you've fragmented yourself, you can't function well in life. You can't cope effectively with life. We need all of us to show up to be able to deal well with life. Well, emotional sobriety is about discovering new possibilities. Recovery is about recovering our lost true self and discovering new possibilities.